Just deactivated Scar's monitoring device, and now we should be good to go.
Took you long enough.
Yeah, good thing you chose an easy spot.
Chapter 13. That's really smart of you guys to keep them all in one place. You don't get them lost, and that's just really convenient. That's wise thinking. The Profithians never did that. Scar looked back at Darren and said, "Yeah, but the move was super inconvenient." He said, "For who? I'm sure you weren't moving the gates." And she said, "No, but they were all packaged away in gardens, so I couldn't take any of them, and now that they're all cataloged, there's no way I could steal one." Andrew laughed at that, and he said, I think that's kind of the point, Scar." And she said, "Why is everyone against me today?" She turned from Darren and Andrew and sulked against the back wall. I motioned for Andrew to move the ladder a little bit to the left, and he wheeled it over as I held my hand over the collection of gates that we had here, up on this top shelf of uncatalogued gates. Well, cataloged, but unidentified gates. We had started building up a library for gates, and it was pretty cool. Right now it was just a single room. We didn't have a ton of gates, but it was growing, and we had more and more worlds that our seers were learning to peer into, and all of those different things. I was pretty impressive. I felt through each of the gates, trying to sense the world on the far side, and I couldn't get a sense of the full world. It didn't tell me, oh, this is this world. Destiny helped, for sure. But even just the small glimpses that I got into each world told me a little bit about what they were, and I knew vaguely what we were looking for. I put my hand over another of the gates, and it was hard to look into because all of these were from very complex high-level worlds that the other seers weren't strong enough to look into yet. But I'd gained the ability over the last while, just strengthening myself. And so I was able to sense a jungle on the far side and the ruins of a city of some kind, and I got the sense of Profithians. I called out to Darren, told him what I was seeing, and he said, "Yep, that sounds about what we're looking for." And I said, it's not in the city, it's probably 15-minute hike out. He said, "That's all right, that'll get us close enough." We didn't want to use any of his gates because they led right into the middle of the city, and yeah, I wasn't going to go for an ambush. We were going to use one of our gates. So I picked up the flour that had been coated in a kind of resin that our librarians had put on it. The more fragile gates were held together with the resin. And I climbed down the ladder, joined everybody else, and I said, "All right, this is it. We're about to head to the world of becoming." I took the flower in hand and felt out the world on the far side. And as I reached out with my abilities, I could see lines of light and color stream from the flower. I could sense where they interacted with our world, but at the same time met other worlds around us. And I still wasn't entirely sure what I was doing when I moved the strings to overlap the two worlds onto each other. But it worked. That was the important part, right? So I pulled it over and expanded the sphere of influence to cover all four of us. And we disappeared through the far side into the jungle of Mallat. And it looked like a normal jungle. Okay, I had never really been in a jungle before this point, but it was what I imagined and what I remembered sensing when I was with Destiny in a jungle before. Anyway, we got there, and there were maroon vines here and there and some black flowers that reminded me I wasn't on either of my homeworlds, but for the most part it was normal. I pulled out Talonthorn and hacked us a path when I needed to. I didn't want to hurt the plants, but I would when there was no path. But we made our way toward Mallat, and it was pretty uneventful as we walked through the jungle, other than Darren pointing out that a group of beetles crossing our path were poisonous, and so we swerved around them a little bit. But eventually, buildings began to loom over us. Decrepit, decaying buildings came up on either side, and at first I didn't recognize them because I thought it was just part of the jungle. Maybe some rock formations here and there, but they were buildings. Trees growing inside of them, and they were half overtaken by moss and ivy and things. And it was bizarre, a little bit scary, just to be walking through this. As we walked, Andrew asked, so when did the Profithians leave the world of becoming? And Darren explained that about 150 years back was when they started the migration, and within 30 years of that, they had basically all left becoming for the world of truth, Saramea, or for some of the other colonies. And Andrew, he said, centuries old history and other colonies, this is so cool. I gave him a suffering look, and he said, what? You can't blame me, this is incredible. And it was cool. I'd had enough experience with the Profithians that I was kind of done with them. But he prompted Darren to keep going. Darren explained that, yes, they were out of resources on this world. I had explained that to Andrew, and he was still confused about it. Darren explained that, they'd felt that they'd been out of resources for a while, even before they discovered traveling as a society. But when they were migrating and all of that, it was less because of the resources and more a sign of influence and the fact that a Profithian had money, that they were able to go on to one of the other colonies until it was really just a handful of Profithians left on the world of becoming, that even now were still living here. They'd abandoned most of Profithian culture and traditions, but they'd kept their home world. I had never really heard of that before, so that was news to me. But again, I was just here to make sure they stayed. That was all that really mattered to me. As we continued to walk, the jungle retreated more and more to where it was just an abandoned, ancient city. Okay, maybe ancient isn't the right word. There was still a futuristic feel to the design of the buildings and things, but it was abandoned and old and felt kind of like an Earth apocalypse almost. Anyway, we began to hear sounds further on down the streets, and so we ducked into a building and stepped into a room that was musty, and the wooden floorboards were utterly decayed. The window was broken out of its frame. There were glass shards that, if they weren't holding desperately to the window frame, they were just all across the ground. And there was the smell of must and earth to the air. Scar wrinkled her nose in a very cute way, I have to say, and turned to us and said, all right, what's the plan? And Darren said, well, I hope to come through on the western end, but that doesn't seem to be the case because there are people between here and the capital. He said if we could get to the sewer system, the Profithians are using it, but they're not like guarding it or anything, and that could get us into the heart of the city, or very close by, without being seen. And as he said this, I sired out, and I could see the sewer system that he was talking about. And I guided the rest of the group a few buildings down. We slipped in, and Scar happily broke down a door to get us down into the sewer system. And as we stepped down, I continued to feel out with Destiny to, first off see, because it was dark, and to get a view of the layout for the sewer system and where exactly we needed to go. We started forward, and Andrew said, guys, are we gonna light a torch or something? And I guess something I forgot. Okay, rewind just a sec. Back when we were in the room, I saw where the sewer system was, and I started to get us to go. But Darren caught my arm before we left, and he said, Reggie, there's at least one seer out here. I don't know where, and I don't know if we're going to have to worry about that. But for us to go on, I'm going to need my things back, especially that sphere. That's my only protection against Spacere, and I'm going to need it. And I said, you'll be fine. And he said, look, I can't get caught by the Profithians again. I don't know what's going to happen. I weighed him with my eyes and eventually opened up my scabbard, and I pulled out his gun and holster and his lightweight jacket and his utility belt. But I kept the sphere safe. He put on the rest of the things and judged me for a moment, telling me, just in the way that he was looking at me, that if anything happened, it was going to be my fault, which is exactly why I kept hold of the sphere, kept it away from Darren. I wanted us prepared, but I wasn't going to let us get ambushed or overtaken. So that it makes a little bit more sense what Andrew said. I can't see anything in this dark once we'd gotten into the sewer. And Andrew, I had my siring. I couldn't really share that with him. And Scar just rolled her eyes, but Darren pulled out a pair of glasses and handed them to Andrew. I wasn't sure where he'd gotten those, because we checked all of his stuff, and there were no pocket dimensions. I didn't remember seeing glasses in his stuff, but that gave me pause. But we continued on our way. I was still cautious as before of Darren and everything that he was capable of as we made our way down through the sewers. And I was very surprised. I anticipated to have a putrid cesspool that we'd be walking through. I don't know. But after 150 years, it felt clean. Like, there was nothing really wet here. I mean, the whole place was humid, and you could smell the humidity and just the smell of earth, but it was fairly clean. And I was pleasantly surprised, happy about that. As we made our way down, I tracked our path out through the corridors. And as I was siring out, I sensed something in the capital, and probed out a little bit with Destiny. I could sense. I couldn't sense a lot about the capital because there was something blocking the way. Sorry, I got lost for a minute. Yeah, there was something blocking my blocking destiny there. Like, all throughout the central part of Mallat, but especially in where I could sense that the Capitol building was. And as I probed out, I could make out something there. And it was a Profithian. I could almost see her standing tall, head cocked as if she was listening for something far away. And I immediately pulled out the sphere from my scabbard and held it. It washed over me, flooding destiny out. The orange corrupted ISO doing its work. But it blocked the seer from seeing me. Darren looked over, saw me clutching his sphere, and said, "I'm guessing you saw spaghetti? She didn't notice you, did she?" That'd make things a little bit difficult. And I was a little bit frustrated that I felt like we hadn't been very well prepared. And Darren said, "Hey, I did warn you that they were choosing a new Sinaya. I wish that we could have come here before they brought her on from Trust, but that's where we're at right now." And I said, "Any other potentially mission-threatening information we need to know?" And he said, "None that I'm privy to." And we continued on our way. I stumbled along some of the uneven cement slabs, and I had caught myself, but I couldn't see in the dark with destiny completely blocked, but I was definitely holding on to this sphere. I needed it more than Darren ever would. Having it in his possession would not have helped us anyway. So, but Scar reached out and took my hand and asked if I wanted her allomancy, and I nodded thank you and hummed into Feather Life. Immediately I was able to see through the darkness a little bit better, and all of my senses just grew heightened. As we walked along, Scar turned back to Darren and she said, "I'm so sorry that you've lost your place here. I can't imagine how hard this last little bit has been for you." And he nodded, said that it had been hard. He said, "I mean, it was always a novel thing for the Profithians to have a human representative among them, but ever since Nightfall, I'm just a symbol of their defeat and a reminder that they lost the world of truth." He said, I can't even spend a night out in the outer reaches of the area, because if a Profithian didn't know me beforehand, they think that Jay sent me to spy on them or to attack them, and honestly, their fear hurts just as much as the judgment of the leaders. And Andrew said, "Man, that's not right." He said, "Hey, look, if G ever kicks you out, you can stay at my place. I don't know what I'll tell my parents, but you've got a place to stay." And at first when he said that, I was a little bit taken aback. I was like, that he would think that I would do that, though I would definitely do that. And I knew it wasn't Destiny mad at Darren because Destiny was completely cut off. I was mad at him too. Still hadn't gotten over everything he'd done to me. Anyway, we walked along, and as we drew near the center, I could still remember the map that Destiny had shown me, and so I was able to lead us, and I began to smell the sewer, because in the center they were using it again, and the smell of bitter manure grew in the air to where it was almost more than I could bear, and I figured it was better to have a hard time seeing than to have to smell this, and so I stopped using Scar's magic. And eventually we made our way, or we got to a door, an old, sturdy door that would lead up to the Capitol. And Andrew had his shirt over his nose. They said, "Is this it? Like, let's get out of here as soon as we can." Making sure to whisper, which I was grateful for, because we had no idea what was in here, especially without Destiny. And Scar went to the door and tried it, but the handle wouldn't move. There was a lock on the door of some kind, and she said, we're going to have to get through this. And I said, Scar, you want to pick it? And she said, that's not one of the skills I have. And Andrew said, really? I feel like that's kind of, along with your whole aura, you fight, you're invincible, you pick locks. And she said, I'll get to it one day, but I've had more important things to work on. She's like, but I usually just shoot through doors anyway. And she went to pull out her lightsaber. But Darren took her arm and he said, I'll pick the lock. He said, we don't want to attract any attention, if possible. And pulled out his lock-picking kit, which I also did not remember in his utility belt. He definitely had a pocket dimension somewhere that we hadn't noticed. I was glad that he had the lock-picking. We shouldn't need it anyway because I have Destiny and I could pick the lock no problem, but it was frustrating. Still is. It's frustrating to be limited. As he was picking the lock, Andrew said, Kay, why is it that it looks like a human door? It's taller than most, but it's a square, it's got a handle, it's got a lock. Why does it look so normal? And Darren said, the reason we have doors the way they are on Earth is because of the needs that have arisen. You needed to get in and out of houses, and it's got to be tall enough to let a person through, but thin enough to keep structural security. As coverings got more advanced, we needed to get materials easy to work with, and squares are very easy to work with. And then you'd need a handle to open it, and as humans and Profithians learned to lock things, they'd put a lock on the door, put the handle where it'd give you the most torque, and about the same height as a hand. He said you'll find on the different worlds that things are a lot more normal than you'd think. There are worlds where the laws of physics are different, and so you get really odd things, but especially on more complex worlds that have the same amount of rules and things that our world has, they're pretty normal. Things evolve quite similar in a lot of instances. And that gave Andrew some thinking. But eventually Darren worked his magic, and we heard something lightly click in the door and said, okay. He pulled his tools back, and he said, Scar, you want to do the honors? And she said, gladly. She turned the door handle and pushed it just enough that it was almost free, that she stood back and pulled out her gun and kicked the door open. Or, before she kicked the door open, Darren said, now remember, the people that we're fighting are people. They have lives. They may not want to be part of this conflict. So I know I'm not the leader of this mission, but if you don't have to hurt somebody, please don't do it. We nodded, and I told Scar to kick down the door. And she did, and revealed the two Profithian guards on the far side. End of chapter 13.